Så varmt välkomna idag till dagens seminarium. Och det ska ju handla om Service Integration. Och det kommer att hållas av Satyendra Shrotri, som är en frilanskonsult i vårt nätverk. Och bakgrunden till att Satyendra vill dela med sig då av sina kunskaper inom det här området, det är ju det att han har över 20 års erfarenhet från många stora kunder i flertalet branscher. Och han har sett att Service Integration är ett område som blir allt viktigare. Och vad är Service Integration kan man ju fråga sig, och det kommer ju Satyendra berätta för alla. Men väldigt kort nu inledningsvis kan jag berätta att det handlar just om hur stora företag ska hantera utmaningarna med att man har väldigt många leverantörer inom IT. Och hur ska man få alla de här leverantörerna att tillsammans leverera det affärsvärde som man behöver. Och i och med digitaliseringen så blir det här allt viktigare. Så vår tanke då är att NOX tycker att det här är ett område som kan vara intressant för er konsulter och frilansare. För det kan ju vara något som kan erbjuda er möjligheter. Ni kanske är bakom som projektledare och vill hitta nya ingångar till behoven på IT-marknaden. Så innan vi börjar så tänker jag bara berätta lite kort också att ni får jättegärna ha kamerorna på så vi ser varandra, det är alltid trevligt. Mjuta gärna era mikrofoner. Ställ frågor i chatten och ni kan ställa de här frågorna på svenska eller på engelska. Satyendra kommer att hålla föredraget på engelska och om det är frågor på svenska så ska jag försöka översätta dem till honom. Och så kommer vi hålla på till 12:30. So now, Satyendra, I will hand over the talking microphone to you, and wish you good luck with the seminar, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Claire, and welcome everyone. I hope I am audible, clear and loud. We will today look at what service integration is and how that can help businesses as well as IT to drive growth from various dimensions, right? So this is a short brief about me. Have around 20 years of experience. I believe Clea shared this in Swedish. My Swedish is not bad, so sincere apologies for that. I try and understand as much as possible, but as you know, not being educated in Swedish medium, my talking skills are very limited to ordering only food from a restaurant or ordering wine and stuff like that. So I believe I will keep improving as and when I get time to do so. I live here in Stockholm, have been here for more than 6 years now. And this is a brief summary of my experience that I bring on board. So today, let's look at what we are going to achieve in this 1 hour that all of you have decided to invest in understanding service integration. We will look at why we need service integration, what is service integration, how service integration would be different from service management, what are the drivers, what are the different type of models that we have, what are the different type of frameworks that are prevailing in the industry today? What do the analysts and the market has to say about service integration? And then obviously, how do we get started with service integration as a journey? So, who are typically the audience for service integration when you are addressing service integration within your customers' organization or within your own organizations? It is typically these roles. It's not limited to this, but this is where you will find more resonance to the idea of service integration or having a service integrator within an organization. It could be your tools or platform architects and experts. It could be your advisors, service managers, the CIO and the CIO team, IT service delivery managers, and so on. Right. So this is where you will see a lot of traction from a service integration mindset and a service integration implementation perspective. Right. So once we understand that, now let's get into understanding where this comes from. What has been the evolution of something like service integration over the years. Now I believe all of us who are on this call right now have been in the industry for more than 20, more than 30, maybe 35 years, and have seen a lot of change that has happened over time in the IT, the way IT has evolved. And this evolution has happened on the customer landscape, on the service provider landscape, and also the consumer landscape, right? So if you look at a brief history 30 years back, I know 30 is a big number when you talk in time, but if you look at 30 years past, there were a lot of IT initiatives that were typically in the 90s, which came in as onboarding onto a technology platform, doing something in-house, bringing one or two consultants, trying to automate something, internal homegrown systems, achieving some sort of payroll, some sort of, doing stuff which can be done manually, but having more precision, more repetitive, trying to do some cost savings and so on. That was rather the driver then in the 90s. Then there came something as cost saving and flexibility with process innovation, which was where you had companies like GE and all of these big manufacturing companies who had moved their lean and Six Sigma thinking from the assembly line onto the IT side, onto the management side as well. And that is where came a lot of process innovation, a lot of people getting into documenting processes, understanding how those processes work, which parts of those processes can be outsourced, offshored, onshored. All those sort of different models were started coming in, and more of it was staff augmentation, which is basically having labor arbitrage and cost savings due to moving to more cost-friendly locations, having multiple partners delivering different types of services and so on. I think this continued all the way till 22K or 2000. And since then, apart from having cost savings flexibility, we moved into an area which is more driven by agility, because time to market for the business was more critical. So having systems that wouldn't break frequently, having systems those were resilient, which could grow with the business, they could launch more products on the market, which were enabled by IT. And that is where on the IT side, it started moving into more of a factory mode, because then we know that there is a standardized process, there is a standardized way of doing something, industrialized services, which is basically you have your development done by one organization for enterprise solutions like SAP. So everything related to SAP is taken care by them, and then management or maintenance and support of those systems is taken care by another organization. So the landscape was changing on the customer side and also on the service provider side, where there were a lot of service providers coming in onto a customer landscape, providing different sorts of services. Now in 2020, you will see a lot of these have moved from only from cost arbitrage, process innovation, driving the business, to actually becoming business relevant, driving more business value, which is where you see a lot of these platforms getting created, which are driving omni-channel, which are driving multiple digital channels for your consumers, for the customers. And then you have pre-integrated service delivery, which means the customer now, which is your CIO organization, is expecting that services that get delivered to them and then towards their customer are already pre-integrated, which means they expect that these systems talk to each other, they add value. No more they are interested in doing the firefighting, because they are now looking at IT as not a partner, but a driver for business. And I think that is where IT has come far ahead from where it started, from just doing cost savings for our customer organizations, to now being driver of business value and business for the customers. When we look at how that demand has shaped IT, and we get more granular. 30 years back, as I said, it was more enablement. It was more, small tasks that were done by IT, and IT was just another provider. Like there were providers for tables and chairs and machinery and so on. So IT was just another, and there was always someone called as an IT manager. Now in today's environment, you will typically not find that role, IT manager. Where has that role gone? I think that role has evolved along with all of these things that have been evolving over the period. Because then he was only expected to ensure that whatever 10 or 15 computers they had, they will work. He will work with some small papa and mama shop who would be servicing those Dell or HP computers and so on. It has moved from there to out-tasking and outsourcing, where you have your entire verticals getting outsourced, which is you are outsourcing a network, you're outsourcing infrastructure, service desk, and so on. But in the last 10 to 15 years, what we have seen is the business demand has moved from not only outsourcing to better outsourcing, but actually looking at managed services and processes that are managed by your service provider, because the customer has been expecting that the IT service provider has also matured in these last number of years when they have been together on this journey, sometimes not going well with each other, sometimes going well with each other. But now they're looking at IT as a partner, and going ahead, they're looking at IT as a business driver. And how do we see that? Is because there were a lot of supply chain software, sales management, and procurement softwares that were built by these suppliers, sometimes built by the product companies and managed by these suppliers as partners to these product companies, working with the customer. But today you have a lot of these platforms that are already integrated and are providing not only supply chain, but they are providing an end-to-end solution beyond supply chain, going into the financial domain, going into managing inventory, and a lot many other things, managing payments. So what you have today are larger platforms, and we have moved far away from having IT systems. So now when all of this has been happening, the maturity of the service provider has also gone up from just doing out-tasked work to actually providing value, bringing in expertise to the specific domain in the customer space, which means 30 years back, the service provider was just doing out-tasking work. Now they are providing critical business inputs to the business from an IT dimension, which means they are bringing in their domain expertise, which they have built in the last 30, 40 years, which means the service provider has matured to a certain degree where they can now talk to the business in the business language that the business understands, which was something that business always wanted, but the service provider never had that sort of maturity. I think it has taken almost 25 plus years for the service providers to reach that level of maturity. And this is precisely the space where we see a lot of service integration being expected by the customers, by the business, and by the service providers who are actually ready now to deliver it, right? So this is the space where you will see a lot of activity happening in the near future, and at least the next 10 to 12 years, where you have a lot of platforms, you have a lot of digitalization, you will have robotic process automation and AI. But when you have all of these different technology dimensions, the service providers are going to be the same. The number of service providers are going to increase because there are going to be niche providers who will be coming in, and the complexity on the IT side is growing rather than going down, but is bringing in huge amount of value because of being very niche in their own space. But the customer expects that this complexity is managed by IT and the CIO organization. And that is precisely where the service integrator comes in to drive this all towards a common goal that the customer has, adding value to the customer's business and to value co-creation. So this is the entire landscape and how the business demand has shaped IT evolution and the service provider evolution. Now, when we look at what is service integration and why we need service integration, If we presume that with all of these small players which have come in because of a lot of cloud, where the technology earlier was available only to some of the big players because they could manage investment, today a lot of technology is available to small consultants like me, where I can try something new and I can come up with a new product addressing a niche business need. We've seen things like your iZettle and so on, which is addressing mobile payments through wireless card systems. Those sort of things were not possible because technology was not accessible. Today technology is accessible, which makes a lot of niche players come in on the IT landscape. Now, who's going to manage these players? Does really the internal IT of organization has the bandwidth, the capability, and the required skills to manage this? Well, to answer it very bluntly, no. So do we replace the internal IT? Again, very bluntly, no. They have to coexist. And what I mean by coexist is there are a lot of skills that the internal IT has which are unexplored, which means they can partner with the business because they understand their business much better than a service provider. But they have to clear their desk with whatever they have right now, which is very inward focused, which is working with contracts, working with suppliers, understanding what SLAs are met, what SLAs are not met, and all of that clutter. Now, that needs to move out of their desk if they want to start creating space for them to have a very valuable and value-adding dialogue with their own business. So that space, if needs to be emptied on the table, somebody needs to manage that. And that is precisely what a service integrator is going to do, is manage those aspects of service delivery and supplier management. So we have IT environments that are getting more and more complex. We have new technologies that are coming in. We have new suppliers, small, micro, and large, that are coming in. And all of this needs to be managed. Now, over the years, we have seen is as we have gone on this journey of outsourcing more and more niche areas, specific areas, vertical outsourcing, horizontal outsourcing, whatever that could be, right? There has been a decrease in service quality over the years. There has been decrease in productivity, and there has been increase in cost. There have been significant number of studies done by leading companies like Gartner and Forrester and so on, which shows that with bringing in more and more suppliers, the service quality has gone down. Now, this was not intentional, but it has happened because with every single supplier that you bring in, you have a frame agreement, you have certain contracts that they will deliver vertically within that space. They are not allowed to look beyond it or before it. So that creates this siloed view, and this siloed view is actually causing these challenges that we see right now on the screen. That is decreased service quality, decreased productivity, and increased cost of managing the services, increased cost of delivery of services, increased cost of maintaining these services and the products, right? So what we see at a granular level is we see there are a lot of these SLAs, and most of you would have seen that there are a lot of these SLAs that are part of the contracts. Typically, I have seen with large contracts, there are around 80 to 100 minimum reports that people are expected, or suppliers are expected to produce, and most of them will report that they are green. Well, they are green, but still the business is not happy. The CIO organization still gets the blasting from the business on availability, on service having degraded performance, and the experience about the service, things getting bounced between suppliers, falling between the cracks, right? No clarity on who is supporting what. They don't know the entire customer experience is still not addressed. Though you have multiple suppliers, all of them reporting green SLAs, what we have is a watermelon effect. That is, you have a green SLA from outside and a red face internally within the organization, and that is where we see these challenges. I'm not going to go into every single bullet here. I will leave this for your consumption, just for a couple of few seconds. If you have any questions, we can take it at the end of the session. You can please note them down, or you can put it in the chat and then we will address it. Also, you will get a copy of this content after today's session. So I will just give you a couple of seconds to go through this, and then we will move on. So we are not looking at replacing the internal IT. We are looking at realignment of roles. What we are looking at redistribution of or redeployment of skills, and realigning the internal IT more towards the business, and creating space for the service integrator to come in and manage the tactical, operational, as well as some of the strategic activities that are done by the internal IT. So your service integrator is going to complement your CIO organization. It's not going to replace. You can go on my profile and you can refer to one of the white papers I've authored on this, as to how the retained IT is going to change its role going ahead, and the focus is going to be for the retained IT more on strategic initiatives, on new initiatives that the business is trying to drive, or areas where the business wants IT to partner and drive the business itself. Those are the spaces where the internal IT or the retained IT is going to work more with the organization and with the business. And the operational, tactical, and some areas of the strategic service delivery will be managed by the service integrator. So what is service integration? If you look at it with a very clear glass, without having spoken to any of these service providers who also work as service integrators, it is actually coordination and collaboration of people, processes, technologies, suppliers, and partners, right? Driving towards a very efficient and effective value co-creation on the customer landscape. The service integration also brings with it stuff like governance, transparency, having more accountability and predictability in your services. So when you look at service integration, this is not a technology. This has nothing to do with any software. This has nothing to do with any platform. This is how an entire organization can be built to support the business, driving it effectively and efficiently from an IT service delivery perspective. What you have within service integration are various streams, ranging from project management to enterprise architecture management. You can have various streams within this through which you can manage the entire IT service delivery and efficient management of IT services for the customer. So service integration is nothing to do with system integration. It has nothing to do with any software, any standard, any framework, or any platform, right? So let's understand that very clearly. But then when we are going to deliver something, we will need some guidelines, we will need some framework to align to, so that we stay in a structure and we don't spread all over the place, and nobody has a clue of what we are doing. So to reach that state, service integration uses all possible frameworks, standards that are there in the dimension of project management, governance, so stuff like COBIT, enterprise architecture management, stuff like ITIL, stuff like agile, whatever it could be, right? Whatever works best has to be applied. Again, we have to understand one service integration framework is just a framework, and it is flexible, and you need to derive your own framework for the organization depending on what your IT strategy is going to be, what your outsourcing strategy is, what sort of business benefits you want to achieve, and where do you want your IT to head towards. So when you look at all of this, and you look at the service integration framework, you derive your own framework and apply it to your own organization, right? So let's look at how service integration is different from service management. So we have heard of service management for long. There have been a lot of certifications in the service management space, a lot of education that has happened, but all of that only limits you to managing the services. And that is typically focused on given contracts, the scope within, the SLAs, the reporting, what should be the deliverables, who should be the escalation points, and all of that related to one single contract or a couple of contracts for the same supplier. And service integration, when we look at it, it is absolutely against having these silos. So which means it spans across the IT landscape. It is complementing the retained IT. It is not just management of services and SLAs and so on, but it is management of those SLAs, contracts, deliverables across suppliers and your partners. It's not limited to service management. You can have areas like enterprise architecture management, your IT governance, your program management, key initiatives, managing key initiatives also can be done as a part of service integration. You can have your entire governance, risk, and compliance as a part of service integration. Your continual service improvement programs can be run as a part of service integration organization, and that builds a lot of transparency and governance across your supplier landscape. So it is inclusive of service management, but it is not exclusive, and it spans beyond just service management. It spans across multiple areas, and we'll see how it spans across all of these multiple areas. So when we look at what is going to change when we have a service integrator on the landscape, if you look at only these three small dimensions, by no means they are small, they're huge, but just trying to scratch the surface. On procurement and delivery, there has been a lot of buying of components. There have been a lot of buying of server space, racks, storages, and all of that. Having no standard processes or tools, those sort of challenges. Everybody doing it differently across the organization. It will move to buying or procuring services. There will be standard processes across the organization. And again, when we say standard processes, the reference is to the customer organization. The reference is not to the service provider organization. The service provider organizations, we don't want to enforce our customer processes on the service providers. They can follow whatever processes they want. They can follow an automated, highly robotic platform, or they can use a whiteboard. We leave it to them as long as they are delivering to the expected levels. When we talk of these processes as standard ways of working, they are always from a customer dimension. They are never from a supplier dimension. We will have on the governance and transparency, we see there are a lot of unclear roles, duplicate roles, overlapping roles, roles where there are no responsibilities, accountabilities well documented or well anchored. You have ad hoc reportings and all of that. So that will go away, and we will move more towards a very clear single point of contact, sort of well-defined and transparent roles, what their responsibilities would be, what would be their accountabilities, and so on. So we move to a very more transparent reporting and transparent roles and responsibilities across the suppliers. So which means I being one supplier, I know what to expect and from whom to expect within the other supplier organization as a partner, or as another competing supplier delivering towards the same customer. We will look at it when we go further down. And then on the collaboration and efficiency, what we will look at is today we have a lot of, because we have these individual contracts, which will have hundreds of SOWs in those contracts. The supplier is very siloed. You will see that there are Typically, everyone who has worked in contracting will see there is always a line item that the supplier will bring in continual service improvement, cost improvement to this degree, efficiency improvement to this degree, and so on. So all suppliers, obviously, they have to abide and align to the contract. So they will bring in and try initiatives that will bring in these sort of improvements. Now, again, the supplier manager who is responsible for that supplier will also have a siloed view for everything that that individual supplier is doing. And for example, let's take Accenture or Capgemini or whoever you can fancy of, and they will bring in these initiatives, saying, we do this initiative, we have this much saving, we have this much efficiency, we have this much productivity, or whatever from those dimensions. But we don't have anyone who is looking at it from an end-to-end ownership. So what happens is I create an improvement initiative which does an improvement in my area, but it adds a 2 FTE of effort on a downstream or an upstream, which is probably a service desk or probably some other supplier. But I don't care, because I have my yearly target within the contract achieved, that I have shown an improvement and saving of 1 FTE. Actually, it has added 2 FTEs on someone else's side, which means net we have added 1 FTE. So there are a lot of these counterproductive initiatives that get kicked off because the view is very siloed. Now that is going to go away, because there will be someone who will be looking at end-to-end well synchronized efforts of seeing whether it really adds value and eliminates waste from the entire value chain. Right. So those are the changes that we are going to see when we have a service integrator, because the service integrator is going to have a pan supplier across the IT landscape view of what initiatives we are running, what sort of improvements we are doing, what sort of challenges we have, the challenges within a supplier organization, the challenges across supplier organizations. All of those have to be managed by the service integrator. So what are the drivers for any organization if we look at why would they go for a service integrator? So the business drivers are here on the left-hand side. You need a more responsive IT. You need an IT that has more business knowledge, IT that understands digitalization and can drive digitalization, IT that can do simplification of business processes, right? And then obviously having predictability, and you have operational assurance, all of these things that we keep hearing as part of the nice to have or good to have, right? So the customer organization will look at someone who would drive collaboration, someone who would share best practices, someone who would bring in industry knowledge from a competitor or from across a different industry altogether, right? So we see so many of these, and this has started happening in the last 5 to 8 years, primarily because there has been maturity on the service provider side, because the service provider to Atlas Copco is also a service provider, probably to Siemens and to Bosch and to some other manufacturing companies, and they can bring in some good practices from there. Bringing in good practices is not copying. It's not about intellectual properties violation. Those are good practices. Those are not IPRs. So you are always allowed to share good practices as long as you're not stepping on IPRs for any product or any service or any research that someone has done. So I think that is precisely one of the drivers where the CIO organization would like to have a service integrator on the landscape, apart from having, optimized resource utilization, more predictability. They know where to go when something happens, having a flexibility of bringing in a particular capability much faster than actually going through the entire procurement process. So having that flexibility. I think these are some of the attributes that the SIAM provider will bring in, which the business is so longing to have. So if you look at what are the different SIAM models, these are typically what you see as 4 prevailing models. This looks complicated, it's not. If you actually look at it, you will and start going through it, you will see you probably have worked in most of these models with your experience over the years. So the first one is where the customer organization acts as a service integrator, which means there's a customer organization, its own business. They have an IT, and that IT is trying to be the service integrator, and that is mostly what we have seen, is where you have outsourced services to various suppliers, and these outsourced services or suppliers that you see here in 4 different colors, they could also represent internal IT. Please remember that internal IT is also a supplier. The earlier we start understanding this and realizing this, the more benefit we can drive and more, I would say, benefits we can get out of the entire relationship. So internal IT should also be looked at as a supplier and not just another person sitting next to me. They having different KPIs to measure, and suppliers having different KPIs to measure. No, then your internal IT is going to be seriously challenged in delivering value. So I think in the first model, what you see is where the customer is doing everything in managing the suppliers, in managing their deliveries, in doing quality assurance, in doing contracting, in doing selecting of suppliers, and everything that you can think of. Then if you move to the second model, which is a single supplier, full end-to-end outsourcing. That is, typically you will see this in smaller organizations where you have one supplier who is managing everything, who is managing application development, maintenance, IT infrastructure, service desk, and all of that. And he himself is the service integrator, because then it's much simple, because everything is outsourced to that company, so they manage everything for the customer. So the business just calls up one responsible person over there saying, this is what we want, this is what is broken, this is something that needs to be fixed. I think this is very less prevalent now. This was more the case 20 years back, maybe 30 years back. It's not so much the case today. Even smaller organizations have multiple suppliers delivering services. Then we have the third model, which is where you have a customer and a business, and obviously they have their own IT. But the outsourced supplier, there is outsourced supplier who does only service integration. They are not involved in any service delivery per se from the lower outsourced service suppliers, which is your application development space, maintenance, infrastructure, platforms, cloud providers, service desk providers, network providers, none of them. So they are typically third-party SI organizations, which could be organizations like KPMG and EY and Deloitte and so on. So they are not in any of these IT delivery spaces to a great extent. Yeah, they have some capabilities here and there, but I think that is more because they are getting pushed into a corner. They have started moving into this space, but they are not by any chance as a full-fledged full life cycle outsourced suppliers. So they are just doing an outsourced service integrator role. The challenge with this is that they don't have much of their skin in the game, so they don't have much to lose if the service integration model doesn't work in this arrangement of having suppliers separate, an outsourced SI partner, and the customer organization. Also, managing this relationship becomes very difficult on the ground because they don't have direct control over any of these suppliers. Neither do they have the capability to scale up if one of the supplier goes down, if one of the supplier is not able to deliver to its full capacity and needs just-in-time scaling out. These companies don't have any capabilities in doing so, apart from bringing in consultants who can advise something or do some sort of very high-level work. So this is not a very preferred model. I have not seen this used much. Very frequently, I've seen this not being used. Some American companies I have seen this used, but they have further moved on from there, understanding what the challenges have been. Fourth one is the lead supplier acting as a service integrator, and I have shown it here for understanding as application development and the SI in the same color, just to have an understanding that application development service provider can be the service integrator, but it is not necessary. It can be any supplier who is a lead supplier in this space, which could be your application maintenance, it could be your infrastructure service provider, it could be a service desk, or it could be a combination of both, being the service integrator. In this model, which we call as the hybrid model, or the lead supplier model, is more preferred, is more used across the industry, across the globe, primarily, as I said, because the supplier is one amongst the many. He may not be the best, it need not be the best, but he is the service integrator. And he also has parallel capabilities, which means if we put application development with Capgemini, and application maintenance with, say, Accenture, and IT infrastructure with, say, IBM, and service desk with, say, TCS or Infosys or Cognizant, all of these have similar capabilities in the same customer space and beyond, which means they have similar capabilities of service desk. So Capgemini being an application developer here, doing application development for all of the enterprise applications, they also have service desk capabilities. So in case where one of the suppliers is not able to meet up the service standards or the service requirements, they can be augmented for a time being by these suppliers who are full-fledged IT services suppliers. And that is where we have this model, which we call as the hybrid model, or the lead supplier acting as a service integrator. Also, it becomes much easier for the lead supplier to understand the entire dynamics of a large organization, because all of these individual organizations as suppliers are large organizations providing services to the customer, which means they understand the complexity. They understand also the service integrator understands the complexity, understands how to work with them, how to leverage certain things when driving programs, when doing continuous service improvement and stuff like that. Right? So these are typically the four models that we have seen. Again, the fourth one is the preferred one. Note, there can be many variants of these. And then obviously the service integrator themselves, the lead supplier themselves can be the service integrator, who in turn can get consultants like us staff for certain positions depending on the competencies. Because in my experience, what we have seen is you can have a lead supplier as a service integrator, but still the challenge of skills not unavailability is also a challenge that they face. It's not that it's a challenge that only customers face. So they always are looking for people like us having experience in these different areas to be working as a service integrator, because service integrator is not one person, it's a collective effort of an organization that complements the CIO organization, and that collective effort comes from individual efforts and individual roles that play as a service integrator within a specific area. So it could be a change manager as an integrated change manager, or it could be someone as an integrated service desk manager, integrated incident manager, yeah, integrated or a service integrator program manager. Those can be different roles in different areas. So this is precisely the space where we as consultants can add huge amount of value from our experience of working with multiple customers, with multiple suppliers, and the knowledge enrichment that we have had over the last 20, 30, 40 years can be leveraged in this space. So what are the prevailing net frameworks that we have today in the market? So what we have are multiple frameworks from leading suppliers, all of them more or less talk of the same thing. Some of them address certain areas to a deeper degree, some of them to a lesser degree, and so on. But there is no one single framework that we would say that, okay, this is the framework that will work. No, All of them can work because it is all about implementing, having the right people in the right place, driving collaboration, and having an end-to-end view of service delivery across suppliers. That is the key of making these frameworks work. So let's look at what a generic framework would look like. So this is a very generic framework, a 30,000 feet view. So you have service towers, and again, these need not be external suppliers. Your internal IT is one of them, because your internal IT also needs to be treated as a supplier, measured on the same scale, so that you can drive innovation, efficiency, and programs through your internal IT, because your internal IT is not going anywhere. It is not going to get eliminated. It just gets complemented by the service integrator. So when we dive deeper into a generic framework, how does this look like? So you have on the left-hand side your business, which is your end users, your business and your business's business. You have your business processes, you have your own employees, and obviously you have external customers. You have your customer IT at the top, spanning everything, right from your suppliers on your right-hand side, including your internal IT, to your niche suppliers. You have at the bottom enterprise platforms for managing services. These could be any of the known enterprise platform for managing services. I'm not going to name them because then people start associating service integration with them. You know the names. If you don't know the names, you can connect with me offline, and I'll share the names. Then comes the most important four dimensions: people, process, technology, and partners. The first two being the most critical, people and process. These are the two things that actually drive your entire service integration, whether it will be successful or it will not be successful. You need a different mindset of people working as a service integrator, elevating themselves from individual supplier roles to a service integrator roles. When we look at the internals of this central piece, as I said, it is not service management. Service management is one part of it, and then you have transformation management, which can be managed. You have operations management. I'm not going to read all of this, but I'll take one or two to help everyone understand how this works in a service integrator environment. So when you look at this strategic, tactical, and operational reporting, a service integrator, when he is not there, or let's take a time frame when there is no service integrator, typically every service supplier is going to provide these reports as in the contract to the supplier manager for that particular supplier, and then those supplier managers are going to sit together, going through those reports, finding who is doing good, who is doing bad, who is ugly, and then there can be individual improvement initiatives that you can launch as part of supplier capability enhancement and so on. When you have a service integrator, you will have the service integration team who is looking after all of the supplier reporting centrally, looking at all the reports that come from all of these suppliers, which means they know what is there in every single supplier's contract. Okay, now that brings us to another challenge. If Accenture is the service integrator, why would Capgemini let, or why would IBM or any other supplier let them know what is there in their contract? Because their contract is between the customer and them. It's not supposed to be seen by anyone else, right? So how do we navigate this? So when we bring in a service integrator, we have a three-party NDA signed between the service integrator, the customer, and the supplier. And this has to be done with each and every supplier on the landscape that needs to be managed by the service integrator. Also, there has to be something as a right to manage that needs to go into part of the contract that is there with these individual suppliers. Also, what this NDA gives you is not end-to-end visibility of the contract. It gives you only visibility of the areas that you as a service integrator need to have visibility. Typically, reporting timelines, but not penalties. Capability delivery timelines, but not the charges for those capabilities. Whether you charge $1, you charge $100,000. That is not seen. Those sort of small windows are opened within those contracts. Again, each and every window is validated before you actually set up the visibility from that window, so that we are not stepping in any other's uh, private space or kitchen, I would say, because in the wider world, we are all competitors to each other. So the service integrator today is, as I said, is one of the service tower provider. In another customer scenario, he can just be a service provider and he may not be playing the role of a service integrator. So you have these sort of challenges that you need to navigate when you are bringing in a service integrator. When you have a service integrator, from a reporting perspective, they will identify areas of reports, or rather reports that are not anymore valid. They have been reporting, a supplier has been reporting certain things green for last 1 year. There is no point in me looking at green. I mean, I like looking at green, but not in the reports. I'm interested in the amber and the red part, because I need to know what is turning from amber to red, and can I control it from going in towards amber red, or can I move it towards green? And similarly, can I bring down something from red to the greener side? That is the whole purpose of looking at reports. The purpose of reports is not showing that out of 70 SLAs, I have 69.5 green. No, I'm interested in the 0.5 that is not green, right? And if you're reporting these 69 over the last 6 months, then I think you are reporting something that doesn't need to be managed reported or reviewed anymore, because you have reached a certain degree of maturity, which we call managed level, which is, it is being managed, it is under control, it can be enhanced, but that's a different initiative and that's a different approach to it. You can look at operational report, tactical reports, and strategic reports. Now, all of these individual spaces can be broken down into these three layers, which means I can do operational project management as a service integrator, I can do tactical project management, and I can also do strategic project management, which can be evaluating projects, tracking benefits, deciding on what sort of funding needs to go in. But this cannot be done on day one. We have to understand that for a service integrator to do strategic service integration within a customer organization, they also need to go through a journey. And that is why this is a journey. So you can bring in a service integrator uh, as a start, but we have to all remember that this is a journey, and this journey takes around 1.5 to 2 years to reach a certain level of maturity. Obviously, that's not the time that it takes to deliver benefits. Benefits can be delivered in the first 6 months, and sizable amount of good benefits can be delivered within the first 6 months if you're going to scope the right things, if you know how to do a phased approach of bringing in a service integrator, how to track the quality and the delivery from a service integrator. This can be achieved, and you don't have to go up a big bang. Also, you don't have to get into all of these spaces here at one go. You can get into different areas at different levels, and that is precisely understanding how do we start this journey, because your operations management probably for the customer is at a very high maturity. Your service management, okay. Your stakeholder management, very good. Your reporting, very poor. Business value management, maybe okay. Risk management, horrible, right? So all of these practices or all of these areas are going to be at different level of maturity. So you need to understand where to start, which are the low-hanging fruits that you need to capitalize on, and then get onto this journey. Obviously, you will have to, as a service integrator, work with people, processes, platforms, which is the technology part, and your partners, which are smaller and niche suppliers, right? So that is where I say this is a journey. Again, as individual consultants, there can be so many roles that we can play within this area as individual consultants, but we cannot be a service integrator as individual consultants. We can be playing individual roles within governance, within strategic supplier management, or within cloud migration, or stakeholder management, or business value management at different levels. And that is the beauty of service integrator, that you need to work with a lot of people having niche skills in certain areas. So I can be good at operations management, but maybe I'm not good at project management. Maybe I'm not good at cloud migration, but there is someone in this group who is good at cloud migration. the service integrator is going to leverage that. So when we look at what the analysts say, I'm not going to read this. I will leave this slide for your consumption. A couple of minutes. We have time, so you can read through this. So what the analysts are saying is that service integrator is more and more a role that your customers are going to look for. Again, this is a capability, which means there are going to be a lot of roles within this, and it's a machine on its own. So it's not just one string. It is not just one shaft in the machine. It's a machine itself and has a lot of parts, moving parts, and we as consultants play a very significant role in this machinery. So what does the voice from the Nordic market say? So we have done some research with IDC in 2017, I believe, and we found that these are the verticals that have had or they are looking at more service integrators playing a wider role within their organization, delivering services. Engineering organizations, utility organizations, retail, and so on. And one area you will see less, which is banking and insurance here. Not that it has been purposely left out, but service integration has been not that much requested by the banking side due to the regulatory compliances and the type of traceability and all of that needs to be there, typically because of the financial dimension that is there. There are certain roles, so they typically go for an in-sourced service integrator, which means they build the service integration layer within their organization with their own employees, having trained by the lead suppliers. Service integration can be done in two ways. It could be a build, operate, and transfer, which is basically a large supplier organization comes in, builds it, and transfers it to your own organization as capability transfer. That is what we call as BOT. And then there is BOO, which is build, operate, build and operate, which means a typical outsourced space where you build, you operate it. There are control mechanisms put in place from the customer so that they know whether the supplier who is providing service integration is delivering to the expectations. Right? So this is how we get started on this journey. I think the most important part is to understand that this is a journey. So you're not going to achieve this in 3 months or in 6 months, but you can decide what you will achieve in this 3 or 6 months so that you have targets against which you can measure your success and you can change your approach and improve. What we do in this is we do a maturity assessment where we understand what your expectations are, what your IT strategy is, what type of digital transformation needs you have, what sort of programs you have already executed, what sort of suppliers you have, what is their maturity, what areas do they service, is the organization SIAM ready, what is the organizational change readiness from a technology dimension, from people dimension, and so on. And then we define what your roadmap should be. We have a roadmap which looks at what should be the low-hanging fruits that we capitalize on, what should be the phases, what each of these phases will have, where are the organizational gaps, or what are those requirements to plug in those gaps, how do we arrive at clear roles and responsibilities, and then we onboard this journey. So there's a lot of pre-work that needs to be done as part of this assessment. And then in the onboarding, then we identify which are the roles that we need, which are the roles that need to change, how do we go through about changing those roles, and start building this organization slowly within the larger organization. And then obviously it goes through an iterative cycle where you improve, you keep improving. Yeah. So that's about starting. You need a maturity assessment to understand your people, process, technology, and partner maturity for your organization, for the customer, IT, and the customer business. So that is the key to doing this. And this is again where a lot of us as consultants can work to do this assessment and come out with a very very transparent and supplier agnostic view, not aligned, not inclined to any supplier, but giving the customer organization a very transparent view. This is where you are, these are the gaps, these are the things that you need to do, these are the low-hanging fruits, and this should be your approach. Right? I think the customers would value that to a very high degree. So if there is no hard stop at 12:30, we can continue. I have time marked, but if there is a hard stop, I can take a few questions now. You can drop your questions if you are not able to address them now. You can drop me a mail, and we can get on a separate call to address those questions. Here is a sample incident flow. After we address the questions, we can get onto this flow. It looks complicated. It is absolutely not. Yes. So we will open the floor now for questions.
Yeah, Torbjörn, thank you for participating, and thank you, Satyendra. I was also just thinking that we should, just in the context of time, just check if we have some questions and so on.
Okay.
And I don't know how far or how many more slides or how long you would need more, but I think it's good if we can maybe pause, since people might have other things they need to run off to, and just see if there are any questions.
I have a question.
Yes. I don't
Yes.
know who is speaking.
Sorry. Hi, Anna.
Yeah, Anna. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I was just wondering here, in the picture where you show the service integrator's responsibility, there is also then enterprise platform for managing that service. Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, how is this supposed to be achieved? Is that the customer's enterprise platform, or is it a platform that is then from the service integrator?
Yeah, very good. So, very good question. This is one of the questions that always comes up when we, at least I have seen when I have been in discussions with the customers for RFPs and proposals. Please remember, this platform cannot be a shared platform. So if somebody is selling you a shared platform, he's just selling you something that you don't want and something that will not work in the first place. This cannot be a service integrator's platform, because then you are locked in with a service integrator, which you don't want to do. Because after 3 years, if you find that the service integrator is not performing to your expectations, you need to replace the service integrator. And if you lock in yourself with the platform, with the service integrator, you cannot move him out. When I say him, it is basically an organization. So it has to be a customer's own strategic platform for managing services. It should have customers' own processes. Those processes can be bought, can be procured, can be advised, can be implemented, can be built by the supplier, but they should be owned by the customer as their own IT management services. Processes, which could be agile, which could be ITIL processes, project management processes, whatever processes, they have to be the customer's processes. And those processes need to have very clearly defined interfaces with all other suppliers, big, small, micro, mini, whatever. And those interfaces, and that is precisely the work that the service integrator should do to drive this dialogue with all the suppliers for understanding what would be the interfaces at each juncture of the process. You take incident process, change process, procurement process, whatever it could be.
Okay, but my experience is that there's very few companies that actually has an enterprise platform that could be used by a external service integrator partner in that way. Is that normal, or is it just the really huge one? Because I would assume that smaller or medium-sized companies, they have quite a lot of different systems.
Yes, they can have different systems. Again, as I said, the platform needs to be the customer's platform. It need not be a costly platform, because costly platform always doesn't solve your problems. Sometimes you just need to walk instead of taking your Porsche from 100 meters. So I think it is very important that we understand what is the challenge and what sort of solution are we proposing. Most of the times, if there are disparate number of systems, then we need to consolidate and come on to one platform, which will be again the customer's strategic platform. The whole challenge is we try to force this platform as something that the suppliers should also use, which is a small supplier, big supplier, and a large supplier. No, we need to just tell them what their interface is going to be. Now it's up to them, because there are some small suppliers. Say it's a supplier to ICA who is providing you handheld devices, right, for scanning your grocery. Now that is not a supplier as big as IBM, so they cannot afford a huge platform of hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment. They can still integrate. They can very well integrate. You can do an email integration. You can do different types of integrations that are available. So they need not have their own platform. But if it is a company that has their own platform for managing issues regarding their devices that they have leased to ICA or they have sold to ICA, then you can integrate it, right? But when you are putting up a system, the whole focus should be the customer organization, their processes, their roles, and their ownership with their needs. The rest, peripheral stuff, can be arranged and managed very well, because I've done that several times. Okay, I've done that for Shell, I've done that for Atlas Copco, I've done for Acre Solutions, I've done that for Jaguar and Land Rover. So I know that can be done as long as your central focus doesn't move from the customer. The moment you move from the customer to the platform, there is a lot of challenges there, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? I see there is something in the chat. I'm not sure. Okay, no questions there.
No questions there. Just a lot of thank yous and people appreciating your and people who had to log off the call.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think if there are no questions, then probably I'll just leave it here. Is where you have a normal service desk or multiple service desk and help desk, and what sort of desks you can think of. When you have a service integrator, you have an integrated service desk that actually captures all the incidents, issues, requests, everything, and manages it inwards towards the supplier organizations. So that is one of the examples that you could probably correlate in your day-to-day working with your customers. Yeah. And then if you have any questions, you have my contacts. We will be having another webinar on RPA on 29th of October at around 2 in the afternoon. I will share the details with Clea and David. Also, if you need any SIAM trainings, I'll be happy to do 2 or 2.5 day SIAM courses.